Started with today's agenda. First item, are there any bill introductions this morning? Representative Curtis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I'd like to request a bill introduction. The RS number is 23RS0596, and it is relating to Employee Award and Recognition Program.
All right, committee, you've heard the bill introduction. Is there a second? Second by Representative Helgerson. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Bill is introduced. Any further bill introductions this morning? All right. Seeing none, we're going to go ahead and move on. Yes, a second. Okay, we're going to have a change on the agenda because Natalie is running a little bit behind, so we're going to have the bill hearings later. Actually, she just walked in. Natalie, are you ready? Yes. All right. All right, so no change to the agenda. We're going to go ahead and open the hearing on House Bill 2077, which is implementing additional reporting requirements for informational technology projects and state agencies and requiring additional information, technology, security training, and status reports. So I will now turn it over to Natalie Scott, the Assistant Revisor for the Office of Revisor of Statutes. Natalie?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry, I was a little late there. House Bill 2077 implements additional reporting requirements for informational technology projects and state agencies and requires additional information technology security training and status reports. Section 1 amends KSA 46-2102 and would change the responsibilities of the Joint Committee on Information Technology. Under current law, JCIT studies the use of information technology by state agencies, reviews and makes recommendations on information technology project budgets and implementation plans, and studies the results of implemented information technology projects. The bill here would require the Joint Committee to advise and consult on all state agency information technology projects that pose a significant business risk as determined by the Information Technology Executive Council, commonly referred to as ITEC, according to their policies. Section 2 amends KSA 75-7201. That would make changes to the definitions used in the information technology sections. Under current law there, an information technology project is defined as a project with an estimated cumulative cost of $250,000 or more, and it also includes projects that have proposed expenditures for new or replacement equipment or software, upgrade, improvements to existing equipment in any computer systems, programs, software, or upgrades, or data consulting or other professional services for those projects. The duration that implements affects a change in or presents a risk to process, services, security, systems, records, data, human resources, or architecture. Additionally, the definition of a project change or overrun would change from an increase of $1 million or 10% to a threshold established by ITEC policies. The bill would also add a definition of business risk, which would mean the overall level of risk determined by a business risk assessment that includes but would not be limited to cost information, security, and other elements as determined by the Information Technology Executive Council policies. Sections 3, 4, and 5 of the bill would make changes to reporting requirements for the Chief Information Technology Officers or the CTOs of each branch of government concerning information technology projects. Under current law there, the executive branch CTO submits recommendations to the Division of the Budget, the judicial CTO submits recommendations to the judicial administrator, and the legislative CTO submits recommendations to the Legislative Coordinating Council for information technology projects. These recommendations concern the technical and management merit of information technology project estimates and project overruns based on a review with the corresponding agency regarding information technology plans, project estimates, and deviations from the state information technology architecture. This bill would change those recommendations to apply to all planned information technology projects that are reportable. Section 6 of the bill would make changes to the reporting requirements for agencies concerning information technology projects. Under current law, an agency provides a project budget estimate and a written plan for the project that includes a description and the need for the project, the tasks and schedule for the project, a financial plan and expenditures, and a cost-benefit statement for the project. This bill would remove those provisions and require an agency to submit a report for a project that includes documentation with a financial plan showing the proposed source of funding with cost estimates that's consistent with the policies established by the ITEC. Any information technology project that pursuant to ITEC policies was determined to have significant business risk would have to be presented to JCIT by the CTO of that agency. Additionally, current law requires that before an agency can begin implementation of an information technology project, the project plan must be approved by the head of the agency and the CTO for that branch of government. The bill would require that prior to the release of any request for proposal, that all those specifications for bids or proposals related to an approved information technology project of one or more state agencies be reviewed by the appropriate CTO for that agency. Projects that require CTO approval would also require the CTO's written approval on specifications for bids or proposals. The state agency involved in that project would be required to submit the project plan, including the architecture and the cost-benefit analysis, to their CTO. The CTO would then make the project plan available to the Joint Committee. Pursuant to ITEC policy, the CTO would facilitate coordination with the Joint Committee on any questions or requests for additional information and meeting requests from that committee. If two or more members of the Joint Committee contact the Director of Legislative Research within 7 days of the date specified in the summary description and request that the Joint Committee schedule a meeting, the Director shall within 24 hours notify the CTO of the appropriate branch, the head of the state agency and the chairperson that a meeting has been requested. Upon receiving that notification, the chairperson would be required to call a meeting. Additionally, the state agency would not approve the release of any request for proposal or other bid event for a high-risk information technology project without having first advised and consulted with JCIT. The agency shall be deemed to have advised and consulted with the Joint Committee if fewer than 2 members of the Joint Committee make a request for a meeting or a committee meeting is scheduled but does not occur within 2 calendar weeks. Section 7 of the bill amends KSA 757210 and concerns the submission of reports by CTOs to the Joint Committee. Under current law, those CTOs are required to submit all information technology project budget estimates, 3-year plans, and deviations from the state information technology project architecture each year before October 1st. This bill would move that date to November 1st. Section 8 amends KSA 757211 and concerns information technology changes in the Joint Committee. Under current law, the head of an agency may authorize a change in an information technology project if that change would not result in increased project cost of more than $1 million or 10% of the currently authorized project cost. For project changes that would result in an increase of more than $1 million or more than 10% of the total project cost, the agency has to first consult with JCIT on that project change. This bill would remove these provisions and require an agency head to report all project changes or overruns to JCIT through the agency's CTO pursuant to ITEC policies. Sections 9 through 12 would amend the Kansas Cybersecurity Act to require information technology security training and cybersecurity status reports from state agencies. Under current law, the Chief Information Security Officer is required to ensure a cybersecurity training program is available to executive branch agencies at no cost. This bill would require the security officer to ensure a cybersecurity awareness training program is available to all agencies. Currently, the Cybersecurity Act requires all executive branch agency heads to submit a cybersecurity assessment report to the CTO and prepare a summary of that report for the legislature. This bill would require the full report to instead be provided to the Joint Committee, and a summary of that report would have to be provided to this committee and the Senate Committee on Ways and Means. All information collected under the Act would be considered confidential unless that information could compromise the security of an organization or information systems was redacted. The CISO, with input from the Joint Committee and the Joint Committee on Kansas Security, would be required to develop a self-assessment report template and provide that template to state agencies. Self-assessment reports made to the CISO would be confidential and not subject to the Kansas Open Records Act. Lastly, the head of all state agencies would be required to participate in annual agency leadership training to ensure understanding of how cyber attacks and data breaches occur, ensure that all information technology login credentials are disabled the same day that any employee terminates their employment, and require that all employees with access to information technology receive a minimum of 1 hour of information technology security training each year. And I can take any questions.
All right, thank you, Natalie, for giving us an update or a briefing on House Bill 2077. Are there any questions for Natalie? Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I want to understand how these changes would impact, for example, the unemployment insurance kind of disaster we had in 2021 when the U.S. Department of Labor had certain fixes, provided certain federal funds for those fixes. Right now, I'm just wondering if they would have been implemented, would they have had to go to get approval first if they were over the 10% threshold?
Natalie.
So, Mr. Chairman, Representative Williams, I'm not exactly sure in that case what would have happened if this bill would have been in place, but if the total project cost would have changed, then they would have had to report to JCIT more. It kind of depends on if they would have been in an IT upgrade at that time.
So actually, I mean, that just has a whole host of questions related to it. It wasn't necessarily a project cost because of the emergency, they realized that it needed to be a great deal of modernization to handle all the fraud. So let's say there wasn't a budgeted plan for modernization at that time, and actually Representative Tarwater can speak to that. I'm just trying to understand if there wasn't, and there was an emergency, and we needed to have a quick response, would they be able to do so, or would they need to go back through this process and take longer?
Natalie.
So the way that the Joint Committee works right now is they receive quarterly reports on information technology projects that are in process. So if, for example, in that scenario, they weren't already working on an upgrade, then, that wouldn't necessarily fall under this bill because they wouldn't be getting reports on that. Now, notwithstanding that, obviously the chairperson in one of those situations where, there's an IT kind of emergency, the chairperson of the Joint Committee can always call those people in and get a briefing from the CETO or from the agency head.
Representative Williams.
Okay, I think that's very helpful, and I think that some of the other conferees that are part of the committee can maybe respond to that and just let us know if that's what the bill actually does. Thank you so much.
Are there any further questions for the reviser? All right, seeing none. Thank you, Natalie. We're going to go ahead and move on to the testimony in regards to House Bill 2077. First, we're going to start with proponent testimony, and actually we have Vice Chairman Hoffman from District 116 as a proponent for House Bill 2077. Representative Hoffman.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This bill is the exact same bill as we passed last year, 2548. So if you liked that bill last year, you'll like this one. It's exactly the same. We passed it out of the House. We passed it out here, then we passed it out of the House. The Senate did not take it up. Hopefully we can get them to take it up this year. What we did, since we didn't get this bill passed, what we did is a proviso on the budget that said that some of the provisions of this would have to go into effect. And so for the last 6 months, we've been receiving on JCIT updates, and we have 7 days in order to look at those and decide if it's something that we're concerned about. If we don't, if two people do not come up and say, yeah, this is something we need to have a meeting for, then it just automatically follows the procedure. We worked with the former Secretary, Angela Burns Wallace, to make sure that we did not slow down the process any more than needed to be done. So where this happens is in a window where there is already a time frame of where they're kind of looking at different things. So this 7 days does not slow down the process. As far as the Representative Williams' question, I don't believe that this would go into effect because there wasn't an RFP put out. It wasn't. I don't believe it would have affected their ability to make those upgrades when they needed to make those upgrades. Excuse me, but even if it wouldn't have slowed down the process any, because there's still certain things already in statute that say they have to do if it meets these requirements. And all we did is put JCIT in just a one spot of it, and so it wouldn't have affected that. What we're trying to do, though, is we are seeing, I mean, you'll see it in every budget, and it's needed. I mean, we do need upgrades in most of our computer systems. Most of them are getting fairly aged. They're aging out, and so we're seeing a lot of that. And over the years, as being a member of JCIT, we've looked, and we have very little oversight before those projects go into effect. It's most of it is oversight afterwards. And if you look at the building committee has that oversight before those projects go to RFP many times. So that's kind of what we tried to look at. That's the main part of this bill is that change just simply puts in statute that JCIT will see this. The other big change is we're going from a $250,000 threshold to a risk assessment. And that's another thing that Secretary Burns-Wallace had wanted to implement, and she worked with us and with the agencies and with ITEC and to try to get that, so that instead of having this $250,000 threshold, it's more of a risk assessment, meaning that if they do a change, if an agency is going to do a change that's only like, $500,000, something like that, or well, it'd be less, have to be less than that. $100,000. But it is high risk in that it touches a lot of different agencies. If it doesn't go right, it can cause a lot of problems, then we would still see it. If it's $1 million program that is it really going to be that high risk, and is it going to be that big a deal, we may not see that. So and those policies will be developed by ITEC. So that's the other thing it changes. And then some cybersecurity changes that need to be done, some reporting changes that were put into statute that now, because of the way we do things, needed to be changed as far as with CETOs and different things like that. So that's why we're trying to get this bill passed. Hopefully we can get it through the Senate this year and get these implemented so that we have more oversight. The Modernization Committee that Chairman Tarwater represents or chairs did a lot of this for the before the RFP went out. Well, not before the RFP went out, but should have been done before the RFP went out. But they were a good model for us also to look at. Now, we won't be able to look at all the different projects like they were, because there's just so many of them, but we can at least try to have some ideas. So disasters like what happened, in 2000, was it 13, 12 or 13, when, or maybe 14, when the driver's license program went out, and it was a huge disaster. We didn't have any oversight of that until it had already been was in the works, and so now hopefully we can have some input in it before. So with that, I'll stand for questions.
All right, thank you, Representative Hoffman. Questions for Representative Hoffman. Representative Sutton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kyle, I believe we discussed this last year, but had something like 2070, the current bill 2077, been in effect, we were discussing the modernization of the Department of Labor. Do you think that having that extra insight or oversight, rather, could have perhaps eliminated the entire issue by keeping the project of modernization on track that began 14 years ago rather than the one that began 2 years ago?
Yeah, I think it would have. I think it would have. Yeah, if it would have been in place, 14 years ago, I think that the more eyes on it, the more The problem is a lot of us, we don't see these projects, and so it's not something that we kind of deem important. If we would have been watching them, I think it would have rose to the height that we would have had a lot of eyes on it, a lot more oversight, and I think it would have, maybe we wouldn't have spent, what, $50 million studying it.
Representative Sutton?
Well, and I also think it would have made the docking basement a little bit less interesting.
Yes, that's true. Yes, the V,
Yeah.
I can't remember what it was called, but yes.
Thank you,
The
Mr.
computer we all want to forget about.
Exactly.
Representative Estes?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I see that you guys have structured this in a way to be very careful not to slow things down, but there were problems with the RFP process for the Department of Labor. Did you guys leave yourselves a way that you can slow something down if it really needs to be slowed down?
Yeah, I mean, so here's the thing, as we can't stop it. And it's the same way in the building committee. The building committee can't stop an RFP from going out. We can't, even under this, we can't stop an RFP from going out because it's separation of the powers between the legislative branch and the administration. Now, we could say, well, we're not going to fund it, so that would, virtually stop it. But what it does do is it gives us the ability to have those meetings with, the Department of Labor, just put them as an example and say, hey, what are you doing? Is this really the best way to go? Here's some questions we have, and to kind of try to bring that oversight in. And so that I always feel like these projects a lot of them are really big, and if we all have the feeling that they're going good, it's going to make it better for everybody, because there's not going to be that infighting of, well, we didn't know anything about it, and we all have a little bit of skin in the game then. And so, we can't stop any of these projects because of just the way that the law is, unless we want to change the Constitution.
Representative Estes? Representative Williams?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So going back to your testimony on who determines the risk, where in the bill does it identify who determines the risk? Would that be the secretary of the agency or the chief information officer of the agency?
It's ITEC. ITEC will create policy to determine the risk assessment, and then that assessment will be done by the agency. But with this might be better for Director Maxwell, but there'll be an assessment done, but they have to follow the ITEC procedures to decide whether or not it's at risk. And we're still working on that part of it, because you can skew the risk either way, and so we want to make sure that it is fair for the agencies, but also fair that we're getting a good oversight. One of my biggest issues when we started it, and when Secretary Burns-Wallace and I had a lot of discussions about it, I did not want the secretary or the CETO to be able to just say, oh, this is at risk, but this is not at risk, because we never know who the secretary is going to be or who the director is going to be. So that was the reason why ITEC came into and that's a better place to decide that mechanism for the risk.
Representative Williams?
That makes sense. Is ITEC in the procedures in the bill, or is that rules and regs?
I think ITEC's in the bill. Is Adley still here?
If someone can just point us
It's in the
to
bill.
that,
It's
that'd
stated-
be good enough.
Yeah, it's in the
State
bill.
the bill, yeah.
Yeah. It's in the bill.
Just where it,
where's-
and I think Amy's going to show me. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any further questions, Representative Williams? Representative Curtis?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Representative Hoffman, thank you. You did a great job in explaining our committee's work, which has been a couple of years in process, but just trying to strike that balance between having some legislative input then with how we procure and then how we assess those risks. I know one thing that our committee has talked about a lot lately is all of the outside agencies and entities that are connected to our state system, and then the vulnerabilities that that creates, particularly in the cybersecurity area. And then when we had the cybersecurity summit, the outcry from our local units of government to please help. So I'm just trying to remember, I know we had talked about putting a protocol in place and perhaps even going to some kind of perhaps mandatory reporting, because we know that the sooner we know about a breach and we're able to mitigate that, then the less costly it will be. And so can you talk a little bit about that just for everybody's benefit?
Yeah,
Representative Hoffman?
and that is not in the bill presently, but I do think Mr. Maxwell might mention a little bit of that. There is a thought that we maybe do need to put in some sort of a mandatory reporting requirement from any of the outside entities that touch the state's computer system, so that if they have a breach of some sort, they do report to the state that there's a breach. Because there are protocols in place that happen, as you well know, that happen if there is a breach. But if we don't know about it, and I will just, for those of you who don't know, Wyandotte had a major breach. What was it, last summer, I think it was, or okay, about this time of year. Wyandotte had a major breach, and they didn't tell anybody. And so the state started finding out through other means, and so things did get shut down. There's protocols of links that have to be severed in order to safeguard our system. And so I do think that's something that probably we should look at, and maybe, and this would be a good place to put it, because we do talk a lot about cybersecurity. So, I think there's some discussions maybe going on and how that might look, and so that might be an amendment that might be coming up.
Representative Curtis. Representative Ballard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just looking at the makeup of the committee, so I'm looking at 15, 16, and 17, that they're going to be the executive chief of the technology officer and all of those with security background. And in 23, one representative with background in knowledge and technology and cyber security from the private sector. So do you have enough people on that committee that know IT, but are the other members, will they be chosen based on their knowledge of that, or just anyone can be chosen?
Are you talking about ITech or the cybersecurity?
Well, I'm just looking at the makeup of the committee. So I'm trying to think.
Are you on 2078 or 2077?
2078.
That's the next bill.
Oh, that's the next bill.
We haven't had that hearing yet.
I'm sorry, my apologies.
Okay.
So just hold your horses there. Representative Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative, does this apply to all public universities and higher education? And I just didn't know how far down the ecosystem it went. Does it go all the way down to tech colleges as well, since they receive state funding?
Yeah, it does. It goes down to all of them, as it does already right now. So right now, there are certain procedures that if the $250,000 is met, they have to do certain reporting. This does not change that as far as who has to still report and all that. It does change that 250 to more of a risk, and then it changes that we see it earlier. But yes, they would have to do that.
Thank you.
Any further questions for Representative Hoffman? All right. Seeing none?
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you for
Chairman.
your testimony. I'm not showing anybody else who is wishing to provide proponent testimony in regards to House Bill 2077. So if there is anybody who wishes to provide proponent testimony, here's your last chance. Not seeing any. We're going to go ahead. We do not have any opponent testimony in regards to House Bill 2077. So we're going to move on to the neutral testimony, and we have Jeff Maxon, the Interim Chief Information Technology Officer. And so welcome to committee.
Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I am Jeff Maxon. I am the Interim Chief Information Technology Officer for Executive Branch, and I'm also serving as the State Chief Information Security Officer as well right now. So I'll just give a little background on the bill, as Representative Hoffman alluded to. This was a bill that we had worked with them and JCIT to craft, and I'll give a little background. So from our perspective, the bill has three parts to it. The first part is, again, is changing the project definition, which is something we've seen as needing to be done as we see projects evolve and what that looks like. So the risk-based model and moving away from the cost threshold was the ideal solution. This covers multiple things. One, we're seeing a change in the way projects are being done. So some projects can do kind of like a bill back or cost back, where maybe a vendor might do some work and then want some piece of a transaction fee or something. We've seen that, and that kind of skirts some of the project process and things like that. So by adjusting to a risk-based model, we can capture more of these projects that can be critical. So, and also we see maybe some of these non-cabinet agencies that may have, as you alluded to, a small $100,000 project, but it is absolutely critical for their business processes. So it should be a critical project from that perspective with the non-cabinet. So when we went through, we worked as kind of a group with multiple stakeholders amongst the state. All three branches were part of this effort as developing this risk model. And so when we evaluate projects, this model looks at cost, time, the security requirements of the project, the compliance requirements of the project, and any reputational aspects of the project. So if this is something that is public facing or engaging with citizens, again, kind of how do we gauge those type of things from a reputational process. So as alluded to from the representative, so this process has been worked on by the Kansas Information Technology Office, which is the group that is managing projects now, or that all agencies and entities need to report their projects to. And again, this was through a group process. We have the risk assessment has been created and been vetted by these working groups and is ready to be put in place. Again, the statute change was kind of the last linchpin for this to start moving to that risk-based model and remove that dollar threshold. And so that is where that has come into play. We've ran and piloted it with multiple projects and agencies, and again, have worked with JCIT to share that as well, what that looks like, where projects score from that perspective. So a lot of agencies are looking at this. They're seeing it as a comprehensive tool that can help them in their project management process as well, and identify and look at some things they might not necessarily have been looking at prior to starting some projects. So again, it spurs a lot of good conversation as well. The second piece to the bill, again, as mentioned, gives JCIT the opportunity to engage in more projects by creating a reporting mechanism where projects will be put in front of them. They can review them and they can ask questions. Again, we kind of have a model in place because of the proviso that was put in. This really more solidifies that reporting process and communication process from the agencies to JCIT to monitor projects, and allows them the opportunity to ask questions. And the final piece of the bill is, again, is updates to the Kansas Cybersecurity Act. Again, as that was put into place in 2018, time for some revisions as we've gone through a couple iterations of processes with that. So this cleans up some of the language in terms of what the Kansas Information Security Office and agencies will report to legislative bodies to provide a little more oversight. And with that, since this act is being opened back up, we're going to ask, based on the audit of the Kansas Information Security Office by LPA, that we include language that allows the Chief Information Security Officer for the state to set cybersecurity policy for executive branch agencies, and also give them the authority and ability to audit executive branch agencies, which does not currently exist. The bill has set it up so they're in kind of that advise and consult position. This would allow them to, again, assess and set policy and audit agencies against that said policy. So with that, I will stand for questions.
All right, thank you, Mr. Maxon. Are there any questions for Mr. Maxon in regards to House Bill 2077? Representative Curtis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Jeff, thank you for that briefing. Other states, I want to just dig down a little bit on the mandatory reporting possibility. One, how do we do that currently when there is a breach? What is that process? And then number two, other states require mandatory reporting. And do you have a sense of like who and how?
Yeah, we do see a lot of states that have created statutes to require all public entities to report any sort of cybersecurity incident to the state. There are multiple states that have put that in place. Examples include North Carolina. I'm trying to think off my head. North Carolina is one. Maybe Kentucky, Indiana, I think, is another one. So there are a handful, and we can get some more of those examples as well. Here in Kansas, we have some processes in place, but there's no requirement for entities to report. So when we, from the state, as kind of mentioned, we kind of hear them through various avenues and channels and kind of the rumor mill. But we do have processes in place where entities can report stuff to the state. There's just no requirement to do so. Some of the agencies have had to set up agreements with some local governments. For example, the county treasurers have agreements with Department of Revenue that they notify them because of those connections, things like that. But again, there's nothing where a single point of notification where we can make the appropriate notifications to take proactive measures at the state to defend our networks and offer assistance as well.
Representative Curtis.
And so by having some kind of a mandatory system in place, then that would help us potentially mitigate the damage and save some costly situations.
Potentially, ma'am, yes.
Down the road. Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Any further questions for Mr. Maxon? All right. See none. Thank you for being here in the committee today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I am not showing any other individual that wishes to provide neutral testimony in regards to House Bill 2077. So if there is anyone, right now is your chance to do so. Seeing none, I'm going to go ahead and close the hearing on House Bill 2077. Next, Jill, yes.
Could I just clarify, Representative Howe, in response to your question, this doesn't cover community colleges and tech colleges because they're not state agencies as defined under the bill. So I just want to clarify that with you, sir.
Representative Howe. All right. Thank you, Jill, for the clarification. So now the hearing on House Bill 2077 is closed, and we're going to go ahead and open the hearing on House Bill 2078. And so I would invite Natalie back to the podium to give us a briefing on House Bill 2078. Natalie?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2078 makes some changes to the membership and the quorum requirements for the Information Technology Executive Council. So in current law, there are some legislative members on that council. There's one senator who serves on the Ways and Means Committee, who's appointed by the president, a senator who serves on the Ways and Means Committee appointed by the minority leader, one member of the House Government Technology and Security Committee, or its successor committee. That committee no longer exists, but that person would be appointed by the Speaker, and then one House member on that Government Technology and Security Committee appointed by the minority leader, excuse me. So what this bill does is essentially take those committee restrictions out of the bill. So the senators can be appointed from just the Senate membership at large by the president and the minority leader, and the House members would be appointed by the Speaker and the minority from the membership at large. They wouldn't have to be serving on any specific standing committees. Legislative members would remain members of the legislature in order to remain members of ITEC, and vacancies for those legislative members would be filled in the same manner as the original appointment. So the Speaker, the President, both minority leaders would make those appointments. The appointing authority would be able to remove a member or reappoint a member at any time for the unexpired part of that person's term. The bill also makes changes to the quorum requirements of the council. It provides that a quorum shall be 9, and that all actions of the council would have to be taken by a majority of all members of the council, not just the members at that particular meeting. And I can take any questions.
All right. Thank you, Natalie. Representative Ballard, did you have a question?
Yes, just the makeup. And I'm sorry, I was paying attention, but I had my mind on this one. I see where, if we look at, what did I say, 15, 16, 17, it talks about the Chief Information Technology Officer, 23, a private sector person has to. About the other members, does it matter who we really appoint, or is it going to be by committees or by their qualifications?
Natalie?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Ballard, so if I understand your question correctly, so all of the CTOs, each branch of government has a CTO. So the legislative branch, the executive branch, the judicial branch, they all have CTOs. And because of their position, they have membership on this council. So just by serving in that role, they are members. The membership with the representative with background and knowledge in technology and cybersecurity is just someone from the private sector. So that could be an appointment. It's not because, of a certain position that they hold. It's just an appointment that's made.
Representative Ballard?
Okay, I think that answers my question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Committee, any further questions for the reviser? All right, seeing none. Thank you, Natalie. I am not showing anybody who has provided proponent or opponent testimony in regards to House Bill 2078. So if there is anybody who wishes to supply proponent or opponent testimony, here's your chance. Seeing none, we're going to go ahead and move on to a neutral testimony. And today we have Alan Weiss, the Legislative Chief Information Officer from Legislative Office of Information Services. Alan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am Alan Weiss, the Legislative Chief Information Technology Officer for the Kansas Legislature. And I brought these recommendations to the Joint Committee at their November meeting to help, I think, clarify the legislative member's appointment to the Information Technology Council. Natalie did a great job of explaining this bill, but to remove the restrictions for the leadership for appointing from specific committees, and to ensure that that the legislative members are not limited to the 18-month term, that they are appointed as long as they're members of the legislature and will serve until reappointed. Also, in the statute, the three CTOs chair the council on a rotating basis. So I just wanted to get in the statute that define what the quorum is for the council, in case there's ever any question about that. So that's the updates I recommended, and I can stand for any questions.
All right, thank you, Alan. Committee, are there any questions for Alan? All right, seeing none, thank you again for being here.
Thank you.
If there is anybody else who wishes to supply neutral testimony in regards to House Bill 2078, here's your opportunity. Seeing none, I'm going to go ahead and close the hearing on House Bill 2078. All right, committee, we're going to go ahead and move on to the next item on the agenda, and that is an update from the Department of Labor Modernization. And so I'd invite the Secretary of Labor, Amber Schultz, with the Kansas Department of Labor. Madam Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the council. So we've got a brief update for you today, where we are on our modernization project and also our trust fund. Wait for that to get up. All right. There we go. So again, I am Amber Schultz. I'm the Secretary of the Kansas Department of Labor. Next slide. Just as a brief reminder, kind of the challenges that we were facing from going into 22, specifically the summer and fall of, 2020, and more specifically the summer and fall of 2020. So we had an overwhelming volume of claims during that time. I've been told that during the Great Recession in 08-09, that they believed that was the high water mark for the volume of claims, that there was no way that we would ever go above and beyond that, and we certainly did, and I've got a chart that I will show you here in a minute. Additionally, Congress passed a number of unemployment programs that some were new, like the PUA, which is for non-traditional workers, so gig workers, self-employed. But they also included PEUC, which extended the amount of weeks available for unemployment, Lost Wages Assistance Program, LWA, which is administered through FEMA, MEUC, and FPUC, which included originally an additional $600 on top of your benefits, but later changed to $300. Going into the pandemic, the funding model that we rely on through the U.S. Department of Labor actually does not provide us any flexibility to move up or move down, do the things that we would like to do during down times. And so during this time, we had bare minimum staff keeping the lights on and administrating unemployment benefits. We know that we had some issues with both our modernized and legacy systems that we have. We saw a lot of different fraud, but one thing I want to point out too is the constantly changing guidance from the U.S. Department of Labor on how to administer these programs. In fact, on the last day that these programs were available, they issued an 80-page plus guidance document that actually caused us to have to go back and redetermine additional claims. And so between that, the continuous audits from the USDOL as well, it was a lot on the agency. But we are moving forward. Next slide. Within the agency, so again, as I mentioned before, these were the average amount of claims from 2010 to 2019. You can see that in the orange, and you can see the spike that we experienced in 2020 and moving down to 2021. And in the green is 2022, and we're looking pre-pandemic. Next slide. Any questions on pandemic? Mr. Chairman, do you want me to pause for questions in between sections?
Go ahead and move on.
All right, great. So I want to talk a little bit about the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund, which is a monetary reserve which is funded through payroll taxes paid by employers. We entered the pandemic with one of the healthiest trust funds in the nation. So we had positive cash flow. We did not have to take out any loans during the pandemic. All the federal programs had no impact on our trust fund. As you can see, as of the 7th of January, we're just over $1 billion. This is the highest balance that the trust fund has ever had. Next slide. And here's just a graphic on the balance of the trust fund since the Great Recession. One thing I would like to point out is the Great Recession took us about 8 years to become what we call solvent, and I'll discuss that in just a minute. But the good news is with the legislation, working with you all, we're able to maintain that tax rate for employers that we were only insolvent for 1 year with the pandemic, with the amount of claim volume that we had. Next slide. So what does trust fund solvency mean? Basically, we're required annually to submit a certification of the solvency and the adequacy of the trust fund. So how long, if we were to have another economic downturn, would the trust fund be able to pay unemployment benefits to claimants? So there's a formula that we use. Again, the federal programs are not impacted by, or the trust fund is not impacted by federal programs. And again, I can tell you that our trust fund was certified in 2022 to be solvent. Next slide. And in fact, our trust fund can pay 1 year and 4 months of unemployment benefits if we were to have the same volume of claims that we had during the pandemic. Next slide. So we're going to touch a little bit on our modernization. Obviously, the main objective is to modernize our technology, right? Let's move ahead from 1970s technology to current technology. More importantly, to continuously be maintaining this technology so that we're never in this position again. And if we do continue to maintain this technology, we are going to be able to, first and foremost, provide expandable technology. So if the Congress was to come in, an economic downturn, create a new system or a new program, we'd be able to very quickly spin up a new program, unlike during the pandemic where we had to find mainframe COBOL programmers to come back and help program those. We're going to improve our data security. The new system is going to be able to prevent and forecast any issues that we're seeing. We're going to be able to transform our business processes to, of course, better enhance our customer experience for both claimants and employers. Next slide. A little bit of modernization history. I'm sure a lot of you have seen this. Our first stab at modernizing was about 20 years ago. In 2011, that project was effectively canceled. Next slide. And then when Governor Kelly's administration came in, she ordered the former secretary to start modernization efforts again. And so there was a group that went out and observed different systems, and they were coming back and starting to develop the path forward. Unfortunately, the pandemic hit just in time for 2020. And then as we were navigating through the pandemic, we continued our efforts on completing that modernization plan. We submitted or issued an RFP in the spring of 2021. And then also in the spring of 2021, there was a House Bill 2196 was passed, which created the Unemployment Compensation Modernization Improvement Council. And we've been working very closely with all of our stakeholders sitting at the table together to best forge a path forward to make sure that every stakeholder gets what they need with this new modernized system. And certainly, the UC-MIC, as we call it, sometimes can be contentious, but it actually has been a very, very good exercise for the agency and modernization generally moving forward. So next slide. So in June 2022, I still get confused that it's now 2023. June 2022, we actually kicked off our modernization project with a group called TCS. We contracted with them for the fastest implementation of any modernization project at 26 months. So we're set to go live the late summer, early fall of 2024. So you can see up here some of our current activities. This system is designed on 6 other states' platforms. So that is very, very good for the state of Kansas because now we have that consortium, that work group that we can bounce ideas off of. We can troubleshoot, we can have improvements. And so with this system, they have taken 85% of the state of Mississippi system and are moving it over to Kansas. So there's about a 15% gap of how our system is going to be different versus Mississippi's. So that's what we're just finishing up right now is what we're calling these gap sessions, filling that 15% gap. We have identified, as you can see, a total of 170 for our benefits side. And then also right now we are procuring all of the ancillary software that we're going to need, as well as we're just kicking off designing the system. So next slide. This goes into a little bit more high-level detail kind of those major milestones. So again, we're between months 7 and 8. So we're starting the design, and we're just now starting discussions on the configuration and customization. Next slide. Next slide. So I would be remiss if I didn't talk about, again, our government affairs team. So they serve as a liaison between KDOL, the legislature, any other elected officials, the governor's office, and the public. If you have any questions about the Department of Labor, please reach out to Julie McGinney or Jessica Dragu, and they will be more than happy to answer your questions. Next slide. Next slide. I just wanted to put a pin in it that we are going to be working with the legislature to introduce some legislation that's going to help us better modernize. Really, it's just some crossing the I's and dotting of I's and crossing of T's that will allow us to more effectively modernize our system and hopefully save the taxpayers a fair amount of dollars. And with that, I would stand for any questions.
All right, thank you, Madam Secretary. The first question, and I don't know if this is a question or more of a statement, but I know during the pandemic, there was discussions because the federal government was offering states a 0% loan in order to keep the unemployment trust funds in the state solvent during the issues that we were going through with the pandemic. And luckily, the state of Kansas did not have to take out a 0% loan because we did have solvency with the unemployment trust fund, even with some of the fraudulent activity that was going on with the unemployment trust fund as well. So I'm glad that we did not have to take advantage of the offering from the federal government. Has there been any recouping of the money from the fraudulent activity, if any?
Surely, that's a great question. So we had a variety of fraud during the pandemic. Typical fraud that we've seen throughout the time that we've administered unemployment insurance is what we call either employer fraud. So an employer will set up a fake business and submit quarterly wages and then submit fictitious claims. We've also seen wage fraud, so somebody that might be earning more money than they're claiming on their unemployment. So those are typical. We were used to seeing those. What we saw during the pandemic was identity fraud, and then we also saw what we would call hijacking fraud. So a legitimate claimant would somehow have their password compromised. Somebody would go in, change their banking routing number, and suddenly funds are going somewhere else. So we do have a team of fraud investigators and law enforcement officials that are investigating all of the fraud that has been identified within the agency. One thing that's important to me is we need to catch this fraud on the front end, right? It's too late if it's already gone out and we have to expend additional funds trying to recoup it. But we've been working very closely with the FBI, Secret Service, banking institutions, and prosecutors to recoup that money. Once we identify the fraudsters, we submit all of the activity that we have on them for prosecution. Unfortunately, it's not up to us if we can prosecute. It's up to the county prosecutors. But we have had a significant amount recovered. We can get back with you on that exact same number. And a lot of that's been through our federal partners versus any of the local prosecutions.
Yeah, I'd like to have a figure on how much has actually been recovered in regards to the fraudulent activity that's been going on since, obviously, since the pandemic occurred. The next question I have is in regards to, it seems like there's been, and I have to commend, I think I did this last year, Julie McGinney, because I think the same as I think a lot of legislators have been receiving issues with our constituents trying to receive their unemployment benefits, and I forward all those on to Julie, and she is very responsive in regards to the claims that I forward on to her. So I want to, again, commend Julie for all of her hard work and dealing with my constituents' issues. But it seems like in the last 6 weeks, I've been receiving more requests just in that quick time frame. Has there been an uptick in the amount of claims that has been requested?
So in the state of Kansas, during this time of year, we typically see this peak due to seasonal layoffs and 1099 inquiries. So while I'm not minimizing people reaching out to you all saying that it's harder to get through, we do agree with that. We worked closely with the UC MIC to develop what we call a surge staffing plan, which allows us better to pivot, get new folks on the phones. And so we did that about 3 weeks ago. And what you're seeing now is we're answering about 40 to 43% of the call volume on a daily basis.
Okay, and that makes sense if it was seasonal work, and then that's why we're seeing more requests from our constituency. Representative Corbett.
Kind of following up on the same line, how many people do you have kind of in your fraud investigator team that's chasing down people?
Sure. That's true.
Secretary?
Yeah, thank you, Representative. So on our, what we call our IDV, kind of the more forefront fraud unit, we have about 10 people working on that. And then on the further end, which we call our special investigations unit, we have 8 law enforcement officers.
Representative Corbett?
And to follow up again, how many people do you have in your call center to actually take incoming problems?
Madam Secretary?
Thank you. So on a day-to-day basis, what we're calling our steady state, we have about 40 people taking incoming calls and also do what we call intake or adjudicating, really taking a look at those claims. Right now, we've been able to pivot another 15 out of other work streams. So obviously, the work streams that they had been doing are paused right now while they're doing intake activities.
And
Representative Corbett?
My last question, like on a follow-up, if you're answering 40 or 45% of the calls now, so the ones that you're not getting, is there any way to get at least their phone number to call back and see if you can help them, or how are they prompted other than just stay on the phone and keep calling? Is there a plan to get back to them?
Right.
Madam
Well,
Secretary.
since we're in, if I can do math, so in 3 days, we would answer 120% of those incoming calls, right? The issue that we're seeing right now is that there are very difficult and complex claims that people, they need to submit more documentation. They need to provide their ID. So it could be a variety of matters why they're calling.
And is there any place, if someone has a problem, they could actually physically go in and see somebody?
Madam Secretary.
Thank you. We have not done in-person unemployment claims in about 15 years. That was a decision from previous administrations as a cost-saving measure.
Representative Corbett.
Thank you.
Any further questions for the Secretary? I'm not seeing any. So thank you for being here and giving us an update on the unemployment modernization.
Thank you for inviting us.
All right, committee, we're going to go ahead and circle back to the first item on the agenda, which is bill introductions. And so first, I'm going to be introducing RS number 23RS 0199, and that is the governor's supplemental bill for all agencies for fiscal years 2023 and 2024. That is seconded by Representative Helgerson. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, the bill is introduced. The second is RS 23RS 0830, and that is the governor's mega bill for all agencies for fiscal years 2024 through 2026. Second by Representative Helgerson. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, the bills are introduced. All right, committee, tomorrow is actually going to be kind of like Energy Day here in Appropriations. We're going to have a discussion on the oil and gas and also the wind energy in the state of Kansas. So until tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., we are adjourned.